So really my overwhelming feeling watching the last episode of Game of Thrones and now thinking about it after I watched it, my overwhelming feeling about it really is that I did not really care what was going to happen in that last episode. And it seems so strange to look back to the first couple of seasons, especially seasons 1 to 4, but even 5 and 6, when I was so invested in the show and I loved it so much and I couldn't wait for every new Sunday to watch a new episode. And now it's come to the end, what is supposed to be the culmination of this incredible story, and I just found myself watching the opening credits and feeling completely empty. Like, I didn't care what was going to happen because the show had been, to me, damaged beyond repair in so many ways. And so many of the stories that they rushed and ended up ruining, and so many of the prophecies and, premonitions that they just ditched along the way. So many of the questions that we had that I knew were not going to get answered. I felt nothing watching that episode, and it's a strange feeling to watch an episode of Game of Thrones with that sense of apathy, almost, of not caring what's going to happen. I didn't care who was going to end up on the Iron Throne. I didn't care who was going to live or who was going to die, because so much of the show had been ruined for me already by the decisions that they made, especially in the season 8, but already in season 7 you can see the real downfall of Game of Thrones. I mean, season 6 had problems, season 5 had problems, season 7 I thought had a lot of problems, but the season 8 really was just a disaster, and that's a kind way of putting it. And I just really found myself not caring what was going to happen to these characters, because none of this felt earned, none of this felt believable to me. The turns that this story took within the last couple of episodes, none of it felt earned to me. It didn't feel believable to me that people would, or characters would, make some of the decisions that they made and act in the ways that they did. And again, so much of it has to do with the choices that they made going into season 7, the way that they structured season 7, the way that they placed all of these people on the map for the season 8. A lot of the problems stem from decisions that they've made before, and I feel like in a way they kind of wrote themselves into a corner. But this season 8 was just a flat out disaster in every aspect, really, apart from two. The two things that this season did well, which the show has consistently done well, were cinematography and music. I found the music this season to be excellent, as it always has been on the show, and I found the cinematography to be excellent, even in the episodes that I didn't really care about, that I didn't like. The battle episode 3, had a lot of really incredible shots, even though it was way too dark, but the cinematography had some really exciting highlights too. Even that episode 5 in King's Landing, even though that was a nonsensical, horrible episode in my opinion, even that episode had lots of great moments cinematography wise, really beautiful shots, and even this last episode had some of those. So really, most of the show, including the acting too, has been strong throughout, but it's just the writing that has been horrible and that has lagged behind, and that has really ruined so much of the show for me. And it's kind of sad to think that this last season and the disaster that it was will forever kind of have a lasting impact on how I view this show as a whole, because it's going to be difficult to go back to the first seasons without thinking about how they ended it and how bad they messed it up in the end, and all the things that happened in the final season. So, talking about the episode itself, a lot of it is really through the lens and through the point of view of Tyrion, and, well, it's kind of half and half between Tyrion and Jon. which, I don't know, I feel like a lot of the way that they centered it around Tyrion was kind of fan servicey because he hasn't had that much to do all season, and the show has kind of made him stupid for the last 2 or 3 seasons. So I guess he's a big character and beloved character, so it makes sense that they wanted to center it around him. But I just found that if they were going to make Daenerys the Mad Queen, which they did very poorly, and they executed that very poorly, but if they were going to do that, I would have loved to see the last episode at least be more centered around that conflict between Daenerys and Jon and Tyrion, whereas now they just killed Daenerys in the most anticlimactic way halfway through the episode. Not even halfway through the episode, I don't think. And then the rest of it was just politics of them trying to decide who should rule. And so a lot of it felt sort of anticlimactic. A lot of it felt actually honestly boring. And I've not said that too many times about Game of Thrones episodes. Even the ones that I haven't liked, I haven't found boring. But this one, I just, especially after the death of Daenerys, I found this quite boring, honestly, because I didn't care anymore, because there was no conflict left. And it felt like whoever ends up on the throne is not really going to make any difference. I don't really care. And so I think even the way that they structured this episode itself was kind of poor, because they removed the last conflict that they had created halfway through the episode, and the rest of it just felt like filler. The rest of it felt insignificant and dragging and boring. And so, I can't help but think, they had these long episodes for this last season, but I can't help but think that they really could have used all that time so much better to actually build the characters and to build believable conflicts and to resolve those conflicts. Whereas now we didn't really, Dany died, and then we skip, 5 weeks ahead or something, and we don't even get to see anybody's reaction to Daenerys dying. We don't get to see how Grey Worm reacts. We don't get to see any of it. We don't get to see any of the consequences of that. We just get this trial, or not a trial so much as just a council meeting between all the lords to decide who should be king. And it just feels like even the episode itself is rushed. Everything about this season has been rushed, and the episode itself was rushed to where it felt like they just couldn't wait to get to the end of it. And, again, I don't really care that Bran ends up on the throne. I didn't really care who was going to end up on it anymore. But I think that the decision to put Bran on it after all of this, and the way that they did it too, is such a good representation of what the season was and how rushed it was and how silly it was. Now, maybe Bran ends up on the throne in George R.R. Martin's books as well. I don't know that won't happen, but wasn't it just a couple of episodes when Bran was talking to Tyrion and he was telling Tyrion, I'm not lord of anything, I can't be lord of anything, I don't want things anymore, I'm not really a person anymore. And now all of a sudden they call him Bran the Broken, and he's king, and he's fine with being king, even though he's the Three-Eyed Raven, and even though the Three-Eyed Raven is not really supposed to even be a person, let alone a member of a house. It just feels like they threw a lot of that out of the window too. The Three-Eyed Raven was supposed to be this sort of supernatural thing that was going to help win the battle for the Dawn, that was going to help defeat the Night King, but Bran didn't really do anything at all to defeat the Night King, and now he's king at the end. It just feels a little bit nonsensical to me, at least the way that it was presented. I don't know, again, if the books are going to end up with that same ending of him sitting on the throne, but at least the way that they got there and the way that they made Bran's character, really these last 2 seasons, when he didn't really do an awful lot apart from looking at people ominously, I felt like the way that they did that was kind of poor too, and kind of, again, just anticlimactic and in contrast and in contradiction to what we had seen before with the mythology and with the whole story arc of the Three-Eyed Raven and how Bran became the Three-Eyed Raven and everything that we learned about that. in the previous season. So it felt like a lot of that too was sort of just thrown out of the window at the last minute. And that's a big problem that this season had. It was just a lack of consistency. A lack of consistency with the first seasons and a lot of the storylines and the premonitions and prophecies and things that were set up in the earlier seasons. But there was also so much inconsistency between episodes, which is kind of shocking, because it's like the writers forgot what they wrote in one episode because then they go on to contradict it in the next episode. And it's just kind of, it just feels like kind of, you know, stupid to even watch that, because, you know, you think, well, these are paid writers. They're supposed to at least kind of know what they're doing, and it feels like they don't. So that's kind of my take on the whole Bran thing. I don't care that it's him. I didn't really care who was going to be, but it just doesn't really make sense to me that they would put him on the throne, or make him king rather, than, or that they would make him king 2 episodes after he said that he doesn't want things and he can't be a lord anymore because he's not really a person anymore. So it just kind of all happened so fast that there wasn't really any explanation for then what made him change his mind and made him be okay with being king when he wasn't okay with being lord like 2 episodes before. So a lot of that just felt like, okay, it felt like they just needed to wrap it up in some way, and they just, you know, figured out somebody that maybe the audience didn't expect to end up as king, and they just picked somebody and put him on the throne. And it felt, again, unearned and sort of anticlimactic. Jon's ending too, it doesn't make sense to me that he would go back to the Night's Watch. What does the Night's Watch exist for anymore if the Night King is defeated? I don't know. Why would Grey Worm care that he went to the Night's Watch? Why would he, if he killed Grey Worm's queen, why would he care that this was some sort of Westerosi punishment that he would go to the Night's Watch? Why would he give a shit about that? I don't really know. Why would Tyrion get to make that speech about who should be king when he was convicted for treason? I don't really know. A lot of it just doesn't make sense of why people behaved and acted in the ways that they did. And especially after Grey Worm leaves, why would Jon still have to go to the Night's Watch when there's nobody left in the city who really cares about the fact that he killed Daenerys? I mean, it's just a lot of it. It's just, I haven't even really sort of tried to answer these questions or rationalize these things in my mind, because I just really kind of don't care. And because I know that a lot of it is just nonsensical and stupid and doesn't make a lot of sense and hasn't been explained well or at all in the show in this last season. So I'm, kind of giving up on trying to answer these questions because there aren't any answers for them. But, it just feels like after 8 seasons, we deserved something a little bit more thought out, something a little bit better. The death of one of 2 main characters on the show, Daenerys, was kind of just, played off as if it wasn't a big deal. We didn't get to see, again, like I said, we didn't get to see any of the reactions. We didn't really get to see any of the aftermath of her death. It was in my opinion, a very anticlimactic, unremarkable scene to begin with kind of clumsy dialogue, and then Jon, kissing her and stabbing her with his tongue in her mouth. I mean, I don't know, a lot of it just felt kind of stupid, the way that they put all that together, that they would build this character of Daenerys for 8 seasons and then just have her die like that and not treat it as a big deal. It just, again, maybe I shouldn't be asking these questions. Maybe I shouldn't even bother complaining about it, because everybody's complaining about this episode and this season already. And I think the consensus mostly is that it was a bad season and that it was a bad finale. And there were, as many unanswered questions as there were when the show started. I mean, they didn't really wrap up a lot of the questions that were presented and a lot of the prophecies and things like that. What was the significance of Jon being a Targaryen, apart from the conflict that it forced with Daenerys? I mean, who knows? Apparently that doesn't mean anything. Apparently it wasn't a big deal after all that he was a Targaryen, even though it was a major plot point. And, was treated as such by the show too, but then they kind of forgot about it and didn't really bother to explore it any further beyond the conflict that it caused with Daenerys. So really, there's just a lot of loose ends, a lot of sort of unsatisfying, unanswered questions that I guess we'll never get the answers to because the writers wanted to move on to something else and couldn't wait to get Game of Thrones off their hands. It's just a shame, really. I'm beyond the point of being angry about it and mad about it because I've had so many problems with this season in general. I had problems with season 7 too, a lot of them, but I was still excited about season 8 and kind of, after a 2-year wait when the final season premiered, I was excited about it the way that I've been excited about every season of Game of Thrones because it's Game of Thrones and because it's this sort of bigger than life phenomenon. So I was excited about it and I was excited to see where they were going to take it and if they were going to be able to turn some things around and tie some loose ends and answer questions and, but as the season went on, I just realized that's not going to happen. That's not what we're going to get. And this is going to be a rushed, illogical, nonsensical mess. And so I'm kind of beyond the point of being angry about it. I'm just disappointed that this is the way that it ended because like so many others, after all the time that we've put into this show and caring about this show and thinking about theories and all those things, the way that it ends was just so completely not only unsatisfying but just unremarkable for a show of this magnitude to end the way that it did, to go out on such a low. It's a shame because this was the television event of our generation and it did not deliver. It did not end the way that it should have in terms of what it delivered through its story and the character development and all those things. It's not about happy ending. I didn't want a happy ending. We kind of got a fairy tale happy ending for the Starks, which I wasn't too pleased about. But it wasn't even about what the ending was going to be. It was just poor execution that ruined this season for me. And it's just a shame, again, to say that about the show that has been your favorite show for such a long time. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on this final season and this final episode. It's a shame that this is where it ended up. It's really, really a shame.